Hello everyone and welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Josh, joined today by Ewan Patterson, because Ewan, I know it's hard to believe, but it was almost exactly 1 week ago that we got our first look at Spider-Man Miles Morales, and in the ensuing week we have had a lot of confusion, but now Sony has come out and pretty much clarified and given us more information over what this game is actually going to be. And I think it pretty much supports what everyone thought right at the beginning, that this is going to be a standalone game more akin to Uncharted The Lost Legacy rather than a full-on Spider-Man 2. You know, that kind of liminal space between a full sequel and a DLC expansion that we had for the first game, which, you know, is cool. They also confirmed that this is going to be a proper arc for Miles Morales. We're going to see him essentially, you know, come into his powers, his first year as a superhero, stuff like that. I know you have more information for us though, and more pressingly, a little bit of a tease as to who the villains might be.
Yeah, so after the announcement kind of came out last week, I was kind of bummed out the next day because everyone seemed to take that Sony exec's comments completely out of context and like ran with them as though he was quoting the absolute truth of it being a remaster slash like DLC thing, which to me, it sounded so obvious that like it was kind of like, you know, he didn't really know what he was talking about, and yet everyone was like, oh, it's just a remaster and expansion. Well, bollocks, it's not. It's a full-on standalone game. Obviously, I would love it to be as big a scale as the first Spider-Man title, but it's very much clear to me now that, you know, this is an Uncharted Lost Legacy type deal. That's the phrase they actually used in this press release after Jason Schreier mentioned last week. And then we'll get a full numbered Spider-Man 2 with both Peter and Miles as playable characters. I'm going to go out and say that'll probably come around 2022 or something. But yeah, Brian Hutton's statement, he's the creative director on Spider-Man and Miles Morales, and there's lots of really cool, interesting story details we've had here, which is great because I just recorded a video on things that had no information beforehand, so I'm just going to keep on dealing with that. But we do know that it's set in wintertime, a full year after the events of the first game. You know, it wasn't clear whether it was a few months after the events of the City That Never Sleeps DLC or whether it was going to be a full year, but it is a full year, and the quote is, Marvel's New York is covered in snow, and just before Christmas break, a war between an energy corporation and a high-tech criminal army has broken out. Miles' new home in Harlem is at the heart of the battle. So there's a few things we can actually gather from this. I'll leave the juiciest speculation to the last part. But I think that Miles being in Harlem kind of is our first confirmation that it is just going to be Manhattan again. I don't think we're going to get Brooklyn, which is a massive shame. You know, Miles' home kind of borough is Brooklyn. It would have been great to see Insomniac add to their map, but maybe that's a numbered Spidey thing and not a standalone Lost Legacy type deal. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this in our initial reaction video, you know, whether they were going to add those kind of extra boroughs or whether they would wait for a full sequel. And I think considering this is, you know, it is this kind of like standalone, shorter experience, it does perhaps make more sense to save off on those extra areas for a full numbered sequel. I do think, you know, like you said, they are potentially missing a trick because it's so tied to the character. But at the same time, if this is going to be, I think Lost Legacy was, you know, around up to the 10-hour mark-ish. It's not like a huge game. Having kind of like one final, you know, farewell to this initial version of NYC, you know, Manhattan as we have it currently, probably, you know, makes sense before then we jump onto something hopefully, you know, completely different. They might even not do it then, Ewan, which is my big worry, that we just get Manhattan again slightly changed, but I do want to see them added in, even though if I have to concede, it probably wasn't fully right for this version.
Yes, exactly. But the other juicy thing here is that he mentions, you know, the energy corporation, the conflict between the energy corporation and the high-tech criminal army. Now, there are lots of evil, dodgy energy corporations in the Marvel universe, but the one that springs to mind the most, I imagine, for many comics readers, is Roxxon. Now, Roxxon are a big presence in the Marvel universe. They actually have an office in the first Spider-Man game, and the reason why I'm going to go all in on the Roxxon Corporation being the big bads of this game, or at least one of the factions present in it, we don't know the overall arcing narrative yet, is that not only do they have the presence in the first game, they actually have a strong connection to Miles Morales specifically. When before Miles came across from the Ultimate Universe into the main 616 Marvel Universe, there was a big arc involving him and Roxxon and their, you know, attempts to make a new super soldier program. There was some cloning going on there involving Julia Carpenter, who was one of the Spider-Women, and all sorts of different things involving symbiotes as well. So those are all sorts of different things that we can gather from there. And I think if we're going to talk about Evil Energy Corporation and Marvel, Roxxon is nailed on as the bad guys in this, or at least one of the factions like we just said. I'm not too sure about the high-tech criminal empire or army. I mean, last week I mentioned the Tinkerer could potentially be a force in this game. But again, it could also be AIM, it could be Advanced Ideas Mechanics. You know, they've got a big role to play in the upcoming Avengers game. So maybe that kind of rules them out or lends further weight to them potentially being involved. I have no idea. But Roxxon is the I think definitely going to be one of the factions.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You know, funnily enough, even though I've read Miles's Ultimate Arc, I completely forgot about this major story, you know, like towards the end. But you mentioned symbiotes there as well, Ewan. Do you think, this is my big question going into Miles Morales, how much of it is it going to be its own kind of, you know, standalone thing? They've confirmed that Miles is going to have his, you know, superhero arc in this game established so that he can jump into the sequel or whatever. But I wonder how many direct teasers we're going to get, you know, for a proper Spider-Man 2, which is almost certainly going to be, you know, the symbiote story.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point to raise, because obviously, you know, I think this will have a degree of self-containment involved. But my big theory for Spider-Man 2 is that it's going to be as much a Peter story as it is a Miles story. I think it'll be both Spider-Man kind of coming together to, you know, really cement Insomniac's new take on this universe. You know, whenever we've seen Miles before, it's either been when Peter Parker was dead, or then, of course, in the when he got brought across to the 616 universe. They did do some work, like some partnerships, but it was never like a defined thing that these two, you know, were Spider-Man working together all the same time. And then in Spider-Verse, obviously, it was kind of like, you know, Peter died there, and then you had the alternate Peters kind of come along and help him. So, yeah, I think in terms of like specific teasers for the next plot, which we can expect to involve the symbiote, I think, you know, we've talked about how it's pretty much guaranteed at this point, given the absence of the costume in the first game, as well as all the other teasers going forward. I would expect to have at least some acknowledgement of what's happened to Norman Osborn, because obviously at the events of the first game, he definitely kind of, you know, it's heavily implied that he loses, or is about to lose, his political office as mayor of New York. So I think that'll definitely be addressed. I'd be curious to see if we hear anything about potentially a Green Goblin-esque character maybe flying around New York, because obviously he has the suit in the first game, or a very early prototype version. And then obviously, we know we have to figure out what's going to happen to Peter as well. They mentioned in the press release that nothing bad's happened to him. He's just not around. So curious to see how that plot thread gets resolved as well.
I love that. I love that they had to like mention it, because, you know, when I was thinking about it more, I was thinking about Spider-Verse. Obviously, you know, Miles and Peter and that movie have far stronger of a bond than they do in the comics. But then I realized, I think someone in the comments pointed it out, that to get that, a version of Peter Parker had to die anyway. So I like that they've kind of like come out and gone, no, he's fine. He's out there. He's having the time of his life. What I want to see from kind of, probably not Miles Morales, or at least I want to see it hinted at in this standalone game, but definitely in Spider-Man 2, is that in the first game, Peter and Miles both lost, you know, parental figures. You know, Miles lost his dad, Peter, I keep going to call him Spidey as if he's the only Spidey in the game. He's not anymore. He's not the only sheriff in town. Peter obviously like lost Aunt May, so, you know, I want to see how kind of perhaps this older version of Peter Parker steps up into this parental role, rather than perhaps a kind of like older brother mentor figure. I wonder if, like, you know, we see these kind of like Miles searching for someone to fill this gap in his life, and Peter kind of taking the lessons that he's learned from Aunt May, who obviously is the wisest woman in the whole world, and then imparting that same kind of knowledge in both a interpersonal context as well as a superhero context with Miles.
Yeah, I mean, we're going way into, you know, speculative territory here, but I do think that potentially Aaron Davis and the Prowler could have a role there, you know, in filling the, you know, the gap left behind by Jefferson, who obviously died in the previous game. I really want to see more of Rio Morales in this game as well. The more time, you know, Miles spends with his family, I think that's a really interesting dynamic to actually depict in the video game. But with him being in Harlem, it implies that, you know, he's moved away from home. Maybe he's at university now or something. So all sorts of different things at play there, and I'm excited to see how it plays out. At the end of the day, I'm very, very excited for this game. I kind of, as I said earlier on in the video, I was a little bit bummed out by how everyone seemed to be kind of down on it afterwards. But I'm very excited for it. And the fact that Roxxon are involved has so many interesting applications in the context of this Marvel gamerverse that is being created. And I hope maybe maybe. When the Avengers comes out, I believe in September, we'll have a better idea of if that and Spider-Man have any kind of connection whatsoever, because they have played it very kind of, mum so far. So, yeah.
Well, I suppose the beauty of this is we actually don't have to wait that long. Like you said, the Avengers is out in September. This is coming as a launch title for the PlayStation 5 at the end of this year. There are kind of a few other technical details that were revealed in here as well about like ray tracing, higher quality character models and things like that. But yeah, the biggie is, of course, the narrative implications and whether or not Roxxon is going to be involved. But I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you think this would be a great direction to take this standalone experience? And how do you think it's going to play into a proper Spider-Man 2? While you're down there, if you could, give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. We will be covering Spider-Man until the end of time, no doubt. But in between then, you can see and read our thoughts over on Twitter. You can follow me at Josh Broom with 2 O's, and you can follow Ewan on Twitter at
Ewan Ruins Things.
And we will see you soon for even more news. It's a busy news day.
It's a lot of news. It's all the news. J. Jonah Jameson would be having a field day right now.
He would. Get me pictures of Spider-Man Miles Morales. Bye.
Bye.